Deborah Deann Poe's name still carries a weight that has never faded. It is the kind of name people in Central Florida remember in quiet moments, a name spoken with a mix of hope and unanswered questions. Her story begins like so many others, a young woman working hard, living independently, and building a life in a place full of sun, movement, and possibility. But the events of one single night in 1990 shifted everything. And more than 3 decades later, the mystery surrounding her disappearance continues to linger in the space between what is known, what is suspected, and what has never been brought fully into the light. To understand what happened to Deborah, you first have to understand who she was, how she lived, and the life she was shaping for herself in Orlando. Born in 1967, Deborah was navigating her early 20s with the determination and optimism that those close to her would later describe with pride. She worked 2 jobs to keep her life on track, juggling the demands of adulthood with the steady focus that had always defined her. By day, she worked at a manufacturing plant. By night, she took shifts at a convenience store in the Union Park area, just a little east of the city center. Her time was carefully managed, her days full, her responsibilities consistent. Those who knew her said she was dependable, calm, and friendly. The kind of person who showed up, kept her word, and always made sure her work was done right. Deborah lived in an apartment nearby, close enough that she could move between her jobs without long commutes or complicated schedules. She enjoyed reading, spending time with her close circle, and building a future that she hoped would eventually lead to more opportunities. Orlando in 1990 was a place growing fast, new development, new neighborhoods, new faces, arriving all the time. For young adults like Deborah, it offered steady work and affordable living. But it was also a place where people often worked odd hours, late shifts, and early mornings. And it was a place where, occasionally, the quiet routine of a night at a convenience store could turn into something completely unexpected. On the night of February 4th, 1990, Deborah reported for her overnight shift at the Circle K store on North Goldenrod Road. She was familiar with the routine, familiar with the customers who would trickle in at regular intervals, and familiar with the stillness that came with working through the early morning hours. At 11 p.m., she started her shift. Everything appeared normal. Nothing stood out. Nothing seemed unusual. She was dressed in her work uniform, and as always, ready to get through the long hours between darkness and sunrise. In convenience stores, overnight shifts often come with moments of complete quiet, times when the store is empty. The register is closed, and the employee is alone with the hum of coolers, the buzz of fluorescent lights, and the occasional sound of a car passing by outside. For Deborah, these hours were routine. She knew how to handle the pace, how to keep track of tasks, how to stay alert. She was the kind of employee store managers trusted without hesitation. Shortly after midnight, a regular customer entered the store. Deborah was seen behind the counter, calm and composed, moving with her usual sense of focus. Nothing seemed out of place. The customer purchased his items, exchanged a brief conversation with her, and left. At that moment, everything appeared completely ordinary. But sometime after that encounter, something changed. Something subtle, something unseen. Something that would mark the last confirmed moment anyone saw Deborah at her post. Between 3 o'clock a.m. and 4 a.m., the next employee scheduled to work arrived early. He approached the store expecting to find Deborah behind the counter, finishing up her shift. Instead, he found the store empty. The lights were still on. The door was unlocked. The register drawer was open, but not in a way that suggested a hurried action. It had been pulled open, yet the money was still inside. Nothing was missing. Nothing was scattered. Nothing suggested forced entry. Deborah's personal belongings, her purse, keys, and car, were all still at the scene. The coffee pot was warm, as though someone had just stepped away. A cup sat with liquid still inside, positioned near the counter as if left mid-task. And behind the counter, a newspaper lay open, turned to a page Deborah had been reading earlier in the night. Everything looked like she had simply walked into the back room and would return at any moment. But she didn't. The coworker called out her name, expecting to hear a reply from the storage area or the restroom. There was only silence. The restroom lights were off. The storage room was empty. The back door was locked from the inside. There was no sign of struggle, no overturned shelves, no damaged equipment, no loud noise reported by neighbors. It appeared as though Deborah had vanished quietly, without alerting anyone, without leaving any sign of distress. Law enforcement arrived, surveyed the scene, and began documenting the details of that early morning. The lack of forced entry suggested that whoever interacted with Deborah had either been let in willingly or was already inside. Investigators looked closely at the store's layout, the parking lot, the doors, the windows, and the surrounding area. They spoke to nearby residents and reviewed patterns of late-night activity in the neighborhood. One detail that stood out came from witnesses who reported seeing a man in the store around the time Deborah vanished. Described as a man in his 20s or early 30s, he was seen wearing what looked like a uniform shirt, possibly resembling that worn by workers in nearby businesses. He had been observed behind the counter at one point, as though he had stepped into a position usually reserved for employees. No one could say whether Deborah knew him, whether he interacted with her calmly, or whether something had shifted between their earlier encounter and her disappearance. But his presence became a central focus of the early investigation. As the hours passed, the search for Deborah intensified. Her family was contacted and immediately grew concerned. This was not a woman who walked away from her responsibilities, not someone who would leave her shift without an explanation, and certainly not someone who would vanish from her workplace without communicating with anyone. Her belongings, left behind, reinforced the urgency of the situation. Her car was still parked outside. Her keys remained in the store. Her purse had not been touched. She had taken nothing with her, giving investigators an early indication that whatever happened to her occurred swiftly and without time for preparation. Investigators canvassed the area thoroughly. They checked nearby businesses for anyone who might have seen unusual activity. They spoke to residents who lived in houses adjacent to the convenience store. They searched fields, wooded areas, empty lots, and bodies of water within the region. They interviewed employees of businesses that operated late at night, asking about anyone who might have been wandering the area or acting strangely, and they collected statements from customers who had been in the store earlier that night. Though several individuals reported seeing the young man later identified as the unknown uniformed customer, no one could provide a name. No one could recall seeing anything alarming. In the early hours after Deborah vanished, it seemed as though she had simply stepped out of her life without explanation. But investigators and her family knew that such a scenario was not consistent with who she was. For days, then weeks, then months, the search continued. Her co-workers participated in distributing flyers. Her family spoke to local news outlets, pleading for information. Law enforcement remained actively involved, analyzing every detail in hopes of uncovering something that could explain what happened in that quiet convenience store between midnight and dawn. The investigation uncovered a few additional details that raised questions. A styrofoam cup found near the counter contained fingerprints belonging to an unidentified male. The cup did not match any prints already on file in regional databases. And while the man seen behind the counter became a focal point, his identity remained a mystery. Witnesses described him as calm, moving comfortably in the space, as if he did not feel out of place stepping behind the counter. But no one could recall a conversation between him and Deborah that suggested conflict. Investigators considered whether he was familiar to her, whether he had come into the store before, whether she had allowed him behind the counter intentionally, or whether he stepped into that space after she left for unknown reasons. Without surveillance cameras, technology that was not yet standard in many convenience stores of that era, the details of the early morning hours were difficult to reconstruct. Family members began searching through Deborah's personal life for any signs of concern. They reviewed her relationships, her schedule, her routine, and the people she interacted with regularly. No clear issues surfaced. Deborah had a solid work history, stable friendships, and no known conflicts that might have contributed to her disappearance. Nothing suggested she had planned to leave. Nothing suggested she had encountered trouble in her personal life. Her focus had been work, her home, and her future. As more time passed, the case transitioned from a fast-moving search effort to a long-term inquiry marked by periodic leads, occasional new information, and ongoing questions that remained unanswered. Each year that followed brought new attention from local media outlets revisiting the case, reminding the public that Deborah was still missing, and urging anyone with information to come forward. In the years after 1990, several individuals reached out to law enforcement with possible information. Some tips were vague, some were unclear. A few provided details that investigators worked to verify, but none led to a definitive conclusion. The identity of the unknown man remained unresolved. The styrofoam cup remained unconnected to any known individual, and the quiet convenience store remained the final confirmed location where Deborah was last seen. One of the more intriguing developments came many years later, when a woman stepped forward, claiming to have interacted with someone she believed may have been connected to the case. She reported having seen a man matching the original description in a different city and under different circumstances. The information was examined carefully, but no verifiable link was established. Over time, theories began to form, some focusing on individuals who had been in the region during that period, others exploring broader possibilities involving travelers or transient workers who may have passed through the area briefly. But like many aspects of Deborah's case, those theories remained fragments, pieces of a puzzle that never came together with certainty. Throughout the next 3 decades, investigators continued to review the case periodically, especially as new forensic technologies became available. The fingerprints remained a critical piece, though they continued to yield no matches in national systems. The physical evidence preserved from the scene was maintained with the hope that future advancements might provide new insights. Deborah's family kept her memory alive through public appeals, interviews, and annual reminders that her story had not been forgotten. They emphasized her values, her reliability, her kindness, and the life she had worked so hard to build. They spoke of the pain of unanswered questions and the difficulty of moving forward without clarity. And through each passing year, the search for truth continued. As time moved on, the case continued to draw attention. True crime programs, regional news outlets, and online communities revisited the details, hoping that renewed interest might lead someone to remember something from that early morning in 1990. Investigators remained open to new information, knowing that even a small detail could bring the case closer to resolution. Despite the passage of years, several details continued to remain central to understanding the mystery. The store showed no signs of forced entry. Deborah's personal belongings were left behind. The cash register still contained money. The styrofoam cup contained unidentified prints. The man behind the counter was never identified. The window of time between her last confirmed sighting and her co-worker's arrival was short. These are the elements that continue to define the inquiry details, that have remained consistent from the early investigation through the many years that followed. In more recent years, law enforcement has explored new analytical tools, including improved fingerprint systems, updated databases, and modern methods of examining physical objects preserved from the original scene. Any new technology that becomes available is reviewed with Deborah's case in mind. Investigators continue to express optimism that advancements may eventually reveal new information. As of the most recent updates, the case remains open. Deborah's family continues to hope for clarity, and law enforcement remains committed to pursuing any credible lead. Her disappearance is one of those events that leaves a community with lasting questions, a moment in time that altered countless lives and continues to resonate decades later. For anyone who lived in Orlando in 1990, the story of the Circle K on Goldenrod Road remains familiar. It is a reminder of how quickly a quiet moment can become something inexplicable, how a routine night can shift without warning, and how a life can be altered in a span of minutes. Deborah's absence continues to be felt. Her name continues to be spoken with care, and her story continues to be shared in the hope that someone, somewhere, may hold a detail that could bring long-awaited answers. Authorities emphasize that even memories from decades ago can be meaningful. Anyone who visited the store that night, anyone who lived nearby, anyone who once knew someone matching the description of the unidentified man, and anyone who recalls even the smallest detail is urged to come forward. Information can be shared with the Orange County Sheriff's Office or through regional tip lines, where details are reviewed thoroughly regardless of how much time has passed. In closing, this case stands as a reminder of the importance of perseverance, community awareness, and the enduring need for answers. Deborah was a young woman working hard, supporting herself, and chasing a future filled with possibility. She was reliable, dedicated, and loved, and her story deserves resolution. Her family deserves clarity, and the truth, whatever it may be, deserves to be known. If you have any information related to the disappearance of Deborah Deann Poe, please contact the Orange County Sheriff's Office or your local authorities. Even the smallest detail can make a difference. Her story has gone unanswered for more than 3 decades, but time does not diminish the value of truth. And for those who continue to hold her memory close, hope remains that the answers will one day come. Thank you for watching Fatal Secrets of True Crime, Real Crimes, Hidden Truths, and the Secrets They Tried to Bury. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps keep these stories alive and the pressure on for answers. Till next time, remember, every secret eventually comes to light.